I'm joined today by Lance J. Cunha, a heart transplant recipient and the author of Resolute: My Quest for a New Heart. Mr. Cunha, thanks for joining me today. Feel free to share, anything about yourself that you want to include, and we can kind of dive into some questions.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm grateful for for this opportunity. Please go ahead.
Absolutely. So obviously, your novel, it's really telling your own journey of going through your heart transplant. And I kind of just wanted to know what the goal was in creating your book. Why did you want to get that story out? What drove you to write it?
Yeah, the goal was the time I was in CC 409, waiting for a heart, 2.5 months. I kept copious notes. There were a couple of goals, maybe three goals. The first, I wanted to record for posterity, and had I died, my daughters, one is a PhD counseling. She counsels in psychology, and she's she's done a lot of work following, for example, 9/11 with families and so on. And the other is a lawyer. So I've gotten a lot of input. They would have completed this book. I wanted for posterity to provide something that would give people, whether they're waiting for a heart or in the Winship Center at Emory, trying to deal with cancer, something to live for. As I talk about this, I talk about faith, family, friends, and fortitude. That's the message that I've given at universities and elsewhere. The second reason, I wanted to express gratitude, and I wanted that also a legacy to my heart donor, whomever he would be, as I kept these notes. The third reason I wrote this is I wanted to thank the nurses. And 6 months after my transplant, we had 15 of my nurses at my club, a country club of the South, for a tribute dinner. I had notes addressed each one as individually as to what they had meant to my wife and me. My wife was given because I knew the CEO of Emory University Hospital, was given the right to this very unusual, doesn't happen, to have a cot in my room between 11 at night and 7 in the morning. So she too was part of this. Those were the three reasons: to leave something behind, to help people stay the course. When I was waiting, there were 12 waiting for a heart. Of those, by the time I left, 8 had died. And wow. I knew that because they would draw the blinds down on my room. One committed suicide about a month after I got my heart. I had spoken to him daily, with no contact, but by phone. He was a McDonald's executive, and he just couldn't. He was 52. I was by far the oldest in terms of somebody waiting. By the time I got a heart, I was almost 69. I was physically fit, except for viral cardiomyopathy, which I contracted someplace in my travels, maybe in a less developed country, helping people north to south, east to west, Asia, Africa, Latin America. I don't know, and the doctors don't know. But those were the reasons that inspired me to write the book. I had access because my doctors gave me access to the medical library, and frequently I'd have 2 or 3 books in my room until I was too weak to do it anymore, to kind of try to understand what this was all about, and moreover, to try to do more in terms of what I was trying to recall for the future. So those were the reasons that I decided to dive in and write this book.
And reading it myself, I can say that I think you successfully, put forth all three of those reasons. I mean, I had the similar takeaways, and I kind of want to start, within your story from the top. Obviously, you find out that your heart is not in the place that you want it to be in. What's the initial thought? I mean, are you thinking, down the road, I'm going to have to go through all these things, or are you thinking it's going to be over relatively quickly? What was the initial, when you first knew there was something wrong?
That's a good question. And in the article in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that's one of those that was asked. So good question. I was in Connecticut I was at the top of my career. I was advising countries on very, very complicated risk and other problems. Um, I was educated to do that, and I wanted to do that. But it wasn't just that. I was also doing these things, in some cases pro bono, in emerging markets. So, I was really, really involved. And I couldn't really respond. The first symptoms were malaise. I was feeling weak, and I couldn't walk the way I felt I could, because physically I felt, I'm only, late 50s, whatever. And I felt there's something wrong. I saw my doctor. He referred me to primary doctor, to a cardiologist, who referred me to doctors at Yale. I raised my family in a village called New Canaan, Connecticut. And the doctors at Yale stunned me. They said, Mr. Cunha, we've got some very bad news, and that is your heart is failing. And this shocked me, and I didn't know what to do. I said, well, what do I do? Can we fix it? And they said, well, you'll be on medication for a long time. In due course, not too far down the road, you're going to need a pacemaker and a defibrillator. One to keep your heart operating at the right pace. The other, in the event that there's something that goes wrong, to charge your heart. At any rate, twice over the next 5 years, the defibrillator actually fired twice and saved my life. Which it's like getting hit by a truck, but it starts your heart again. So my reactions were, my God, what am I going to do? Do I retire? Can I afford what's out in front? I had some wealth, but can I afford what I'm going to have to deal with? Am I adequately insured? What about my wife, my daughters, my grandchildren, and so forth? And if I retire, where to? The decision came because my older daughter had finished at Emory Law School, married someone in her class, and we're building a life down here. And it fit what the doctors suggested I do, namely retire, remove the stress from my life. Firstly, stop making day trips, as I was doing sometimes, day trips to London, because I was on an advisor to the Bank of England. Secondly, Atlanta offered a place where I had bench strength, as I say in my book. My daughter was here, my son-in-law was here, and they were making little lawyers. So that was timely. And the third was the climate. It was much more suitable. And this was a concern as well. They wanted to get me away from issues that could cause more infections, and so forth. Every time it got very cold, my skin just felt like it was going to go into hypothermia. So those were my initial reactions. We sold New Canaan, moved down here, and began through a referral from the Cleveland Clinic, which is the best in the country, to meet with the heart failure team at Emory University Hospital. And they referred me there, and I got to know their docs, and they put me on medication to kind of carry me through until I reached a point where there was no alternative other than a transplant. And as that began to develop, it was very intimidating, to be honest with you. It was very, very hard to come to grips with that. In addition, I was saddened for a very long time by having to leave the career that I loved, and my colleagues and people around the world with whom I was working, many of whom, some have passed away, have stayed in touch. But it was a very, very a big blow, a kick in the belly. But I dealt with it. We took the step, moved down to the Atlanta area, and became resolute, if you will,
Absolutely.
in my determination to do anything I could to stay alive.
Yeah. And you talk about, that refusal to die and fighting to live, right? So I'm curious, how important do you think for any transplant patient the mental aspect of it is? Just being like, I'm not going to give up.
Spencer, the most important distance in life is what's between your ears.
Yeah.
It's what's between your ears. Okay. I emphasized that. I got an email, I guess about 6 months ago, and I get these from time to time. My book has been sold in 6 countries. It's been introduced in 4 languages. If you look on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and so on. And at any rate, I got an email from a lady in the UK telling me that she had bought the book and that her husband had heart failure and was waiting for a heart and was failing mentally. He was giving up. She bought the book. He read the book. He got a heart. It gave him strength. And he got a heart, and he's still living today. And I stay in touch.
It's awesome.
That is enormously, I mean, it brought me to tears. But to your question, what was your question again?
Just how important you think the mental side of it is. Because obviously
Yes, yes.
it's a physical issue, but having the mentality of I'm not going to let this beat
Yeah.
me, I'm sure was something that really helped you.
Good, very good question. Shortly after I arrived, which was October 23rd, 2013, in the cardiac care unit, the ICU for patients that need hearts or have had a heart attack or whatever. As I mentioned, there were 12, and I described what happened. On the 30th of October, I went into cardiac arrest, and they gave me all of the medications to try to keep my heart going and so on and so forth. And one of the nurses, I overheard the nurses talking to a doctor, and one of the doctors said, "This man just refuses to die." That was here.
Yeah.
I took that approach. And the other things that kept me alive, and these are important ingredients, and I emphasize this wherever I speak, whether it's to cancer patients or heart patients, the very fact that you've got to be positive, but it goes beyond that. Humor. And throughout my time there, to have certain songs, with me, it was The Impossible Dream, which I actually was singing when I went into the OR with 30 people, give or take, all holding hands and so on. And I told Dr. Miller, Jeffrey Miller, with whom I've stayed in touch, I said, "Dr. Miller," just before there were lights out, I thanked him for his skill. And I said, "Now don't screw up my brain, because that's who you are."
Yeah.
So that's the positivity, encouraged by my faith, my family, dear friends, and just the strength that I've had. I grew up with very, very modest means. I worked 3 years before I went to college. Okay. I graduated from college in 3 years, Phi Beta Kappa, and went on to Notre Dame on a full scholarship, not to play football, but to be one of the first to graduate from what is today the Keough Institute of International Peace Studies. Don Keough was the president of Coca-Cola. So you know what products are sold at Notre Dame Stadium.
Yeah.
At any rate, that was very, very critical to me in terms of being able to stay the course. Others who did not, I think, perhaps, and I say this because I'm not going to judge them, perhaps didn't have quite the same combination. My wife spent time with some of the others because they didn't have visitors.
Right.
Wives were working or this or that or whatever, and they didn't have visitors. So that to me was very, very important. And I share that when I do interviews such as this. That's vital.
It takes a tribe, right? I mean, it's no one can go through something like that alone.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I kind of on a similar note, I think obviously in any journey like that, there's going to be peaks and valleys, right? And one of the things that stuck out to me in your book was when you talked about even while you were sick, going to Austria and kind of checking off this bucket list moment with your wife of
Yeah.
waltzing in Vienna. How sweet are those moments when all this bad stuff is happening to you and around you, and you can just kind of get away from it for a second and just enjoy life?
Yeah, but my doctor's work did not approve that. Dr. Smith and Emily said, "No, you can't do it." But no, but that's an interesting, and I'll give you a little segue to that. Uh, no, that's not who I am. I have strength coming from here, and I said, "No, I'm going to do this." I also went to Cabo San Lucas uh, weeks before I was admitted. I took that trip, though I had been to Mexico many times, and I love Mexico. I hadn't been there. Now, when I was there, all I could do was walk around the pool, which probably was good, but I was in the CCU within a week after getting back. It was very important. And those memories, I cherish those memories, as does my wife. Um, we talked about the past, we talked about the future, and we really focused, or I try to focus with her on, okay, what if I don't live? And I try to give her the Cliff's Notes version of what she needed to do, um, which I have which I've added over the years. They were very, very sweet, and I did dance the waltz with her, albeit cautiously. But it was what was interesting on that river cruise was that it was during that trip that I received final confirmation that I was eligible, and that were my kidneys were sufficiently strong to handle the medications, which, Spencer, are extremely harsh, very harsh on your kidneys. I'm tested, blood tests every 3 to 4 months to make sure that kidney functions are operating properly. One of the two who are still are alive, I think there are 2 or 3, maybe 3, is now getting dialysis. And he was in my class there. He got a heart on Palm Sunday, and I visited him on Palm Sunday, 2014. A former baseball player. A strong guy, but his problem was he was a very big guy.
Yeah.
And his heart blood type was a little bit more difficult than mine. So, but those memories are very important, as well as the fact that my family, all of the pictures that my grandkids drew all over my room, and it's just an amazingly wonderful thing to recall. So that's how I feel about that. It was very, very worthwhile.
That's awesome. And on the topic of the Cabo trip, you mentioned, obviously, like you said, preparing your wife for what if. So I'm curious, going through something like this, the duality of, on the one hand, you're going, I'm not going to die. I refuse to die. But on the other hand, you have to be realistic and be like, my family needs to be prepared just in case. How do you handle that, like, duality of I'm not going to die, but just in case this is what we need?
Yeah. Yeah. You have to do it. And anybody that's been in a situation like that, you could just, I've talked to some and they say, well, whatever it is, que sera, sera. But no, we redid our wills before that, well before that Cabo trip. And I scripted a lot of important information for both my wife and my daughters in terms of how best to handle affairs if I didn't. I was fearful in Cabo that I die in Mexico because that would create complications for her in terms of returning. I contacted the embassy in Mexico City, and they had it wasn't a post. They had something in Cabo. I don't recall what it was. They had a liaison officer of some kind, and he knew that I was there, and he knew the situation. I had a lot of contact with through my career with the government sector as well. So just in case, I had those plans in place. I had funeral plans already made. I had, different instructions for different people, for my brother, and so on and so forth. So I did address those. It is an important consideration because I knew that, I may not last another day. When I was in the CCU, what I still sometimes at night, my wife would tell you this, have a little post-traumatic issues because the room that I was in, there was no daylight. I had an internal room. I never saw any daylight. I didn't know it was night or day. I just had lights, and very small. It's like an examination room, not like a hospital room.
Yeah.
And it was very, very challenging to go through that. And as time passed, it became more challenging. The doctors there allowed me, at my request, to actually see a heart transplant online at Columbia
Wow.
Presbyterian. Now, it was recorded because they didn't want me to see one live in the event that it didn't go well. So it was one that was recorded that was successful, okay, with the individual post-transplant recovering and all of that. And so it's been an interesting journey, and one that I have embraced. I have embraced it even more for the reason that you're doing what you do, and that is part of my message is to encourage organ donations, organ sign up, and I've been very active. Every year I take shirts out to the cardiac heart transplant nurses who handle the post-transplant cardiac care. And I give them a shirt that has a broken heart from the Georgia Transplant Foundation. It says, needed a heart, and then down below, a new heart, got it. And I give them 15 shirts at their discretion to give to the next 15 transplant recipients. So, and part of the proceeds, I don't make any money on my book. All of the proceeds I either donate to you, which I've done over the years. The past 2 years have been challenging, so I haven't been to the benefit. Both of my daughters have been ill. But having said that, part of the proceeds also go to Emory's Nursing School to support a scholarship for one of the nurses who died from glioblastoma, brain cancer, a couple of years after I got my heart. So we have a scholarship there in his name for that individual. So I don't make any money. I speak on this. Whatever is done, and all the money goes in those directions. I don't know. Did I answer your question? I hope so.
You did. No, and the whole point of the questions, is just to hear the story and hear your insights. So no, you're crushing it. I would say, obviously, you talked about CCU 409, how long you had to stay in there, and then you get that message that says Cunha's a go. So simple. You're ready to go. Heart transplant is ready to happen. What was, I can't imagine that feeling. Like, just take me through that moment. Like, this is going to happen.
Earlier that night, New Year's Eve, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, one of the nurses, petite lady, came in, and I looked out, and she had this kind of strange look on her face. And I looked out to the nurses' station, which I could see, and they were all kind of looking at me strangely. And I'm saying, oh, what happened? Did something show that, that was peculiar? And she came in and she asked me, she said, please sit up, because I was laying down, and she wanted to share this news so that my blood pressure could be adjusted if I sat rather than was laying down. And she said, we think we have a match tonight. And I mean, my reaction was disbelief. She said, no, we think we have a match. I'm telling you this because I interrupted her. I said, well, how long will it be until we know? She said, a few hours. The harvest team is with the patient who has died, brain dead. And, your team is here and they're coordinating, and we already know that in principle there's a match. And among the things that they had to do with me is they had to determine, because I travel so much, this is before that, big bauxite. I mean, I'd been all over. So I had a lot of different possible exposures. And I said, so I asked them about that. And they said, we look at everything and it seems like there's a match. I said, well, tell me about, the donor. He said, can't do that, privacy. I said, okay, when will I know? Again, a few hours. Immediately they began to take what I thought was an enormous amount of blood. When you start looking at this, because the idea is if they need it, okay, then they can use my own blood in terms of transfusion. So they started that. They also gave me some Versed of some kind, light kind of sedative, because I was, very, very anxious about all this, as one would be. That night, if it went forward, they were going to take my heart. And that's an enormously powerful statement.
Yeah.
And, you look at that and you say, I could die. 3 hours later, more or less, a little after 7, Dr. Sahu showed me that his phone and the note to which you just referred, Cunha's ago. And I looked at him and I said, this is incredible. I mean, 3 words that I've been waiting 2.5 months for. I've seen people die. This is unbelievable. And I called my wife, or actually I called her as soon as she gave me that message. It was New Year's Eve, and she had, one of the few times she left the hospital. She left the hospital to go get, I said, go get gussied up. I want you to look very pretty. So she was at the hairdresser and all of that. And I said, pick up some cider of some kind. I couldn't have anything alcoholic, of course. And the nurses blessed that for New Year's Eve.
Right.
I had already received, I'm Catholic, and I had already received on the 16th of December 2 things. The final blessings of the church, used to be called the last rites. And I had also received a call from Cardinal Dolan, the Archbishop of New York. Earlier in my life, I had done some special things professionally for the Vatican that I was in big trouble. And my daughter in New York had told him that I was waiting for a heart.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, when I got Cunha's ago, my reactions were mixed emotions, honestly. Yeah. On the one hand, gratitude. On the other hand, a bit of fear. Yeah. Because that could be it. That night, the following morning, some don't make it. Yeah. And even if you do make it, the first year, is the most vulnerable. And if you're going to succeed, you got to get through the first year. Yeah. So they took a little bit more blood. They had already taken a lot. They gave me a little bit more sedative. I couldn't sleep. And at 4 a.m, they put me on a gurney. And I said goodbye to the nurses and my wife, my daughter, my son-in-law, and my other daughter was flying in from New York. And I told the nurses, I said, I'll see you on the other side, which came to be known the other side to them in the ICU. To me, the other side was, I'll either see you in heaven, God willing, or I'm going to see you on the other side.
Yeah.
And they wheeled me into the operating room, and I already described what that was like. Yeah. The nurses told me that no one has ever come into the operating room singing, albeit a weak voice, singing. Yeah. I said, this is the impossible dream. And here I am. Yeah. So God willing, I'm going to get through this. The whole room held hands and prayed for the heart donor, family, for me, my family, and for those professionals in that room to give them skill and strength. It's a long operation. I mean, it's 10 plus hours. So it was a challenge, but that's how I felt. And, but I think the most overwhelming feeling I had was gratitude, that it was finally going to be over. Didn't have to wait And I felt because I had made it that far that I'd make it another couple of days and I'd recover. And those were my feelings.
Here you are now. So a little bit longer than a couple of days.
It's over 10 years.
Yeah,
It's over
that's
10 years.
incredible. You talk about with that, being grateful. Obviously, it comes with, someone lost their life for you to get that heart. You talk about paying it forward and honoring that donor family. How important is that to you?
It's very important. The donor family, there are two couple of ways to pay it forward. One is supporting your organization, but that's financial and doing what we're doing now, and speaking around my book, and around some of the other things on which I'm called to speak, where people are in palliative care and they need reassurance. And I do that as well. And I've traveled. I've been at Johns Hopkins. I've been at the Cleveland Clinic, and I've done these things. Um, the other is paying it forward in terms of the family. A year to the day, I met the mother. How did that happen? I wrote to her. I got a heart New Year's Day. I wrote to her on Valentine's Day, six weeks later. It goes through channels
Mm-hmm.
because they have to remove names and all of that.
Right.
It saved her life. She told me that because
Wow.
she was desperate, depressed, suicidal, having lost her son. She grew up with that young man. She is the same age as my younger daughter.
Wow.
Okay, she grew up with him. She had him when she was 17 years old. This is a family in Monticello. Sorry, down here they call it Monticello. Up north they call it Monticello. Monticello, Georgia, um, where everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
When I went down there, I met everybody. And it's like, well, if you've seen that scene from The Godfather, this is Paulie, this is Peter, this is, and one's a cousin, one's a second cousin, and all of that. God bless them. When I arrive in that town, Richie is my donor, his father, and they're divorced. She's remarried. His father is the sheriff. As soon as I get to the outskirts of the county, I get an escort into
Wow.
the city. The press is there to interview me, and I've spoken at the various places which I mentioned.
Yeah.
So, passing it forward, we've helped them a lot, helped them spiritually, financially. They're poor. We stay in touch regularly. My wife calls probably every couple of months. We visited them down there. The grandmother, who's passed away since my heart transplant, when I first went down there, apologized for getting makeup on my shirt. She wanted to put her ear on my chest to
Wow.
listen to her grandson's heart.
Wow.
Imagine that.
Yeah.
Her mother, whose name is Belinda, takes my wrist and holds her hand on my wrist to feel her son's pulse.
Wow.
And in his room are two EKGs, which I framed and gave them to Belinda. One is just before he died, and one is right after my transplant. They're
Wow.
identical. They're identical, as they would be.
Yeah.
So, it's I try to do the best I can. My family has had a lot of health problems. Mary has had 2 strokes, in part because of this. Both of my daughters have battled cancer.
Wow.
So I'm torn between things. I also still am asked to speak on my professional stuff. I'm an adjunct professor at Notre Dame and at Emory in their business schools. So occasionally I don't teach a course. I did, but I don't teach a course anymore. I just can't stay current.
Yeah.
And if you're not current, smart students like you are going to challenge the professor. And I don't want to deal with that. So I'm usually of a forum,
Right.
group discussion, which I enjoy very much. So my plate is full, but I do the best I can to
Yeah.
pass it on. And
That's awesome.
that's where I am.
That's awesome. I would say that my kind of final question before, we kind of give you the floor to share whatever else you may want to share would just be someone is about to go through their transplant journey. They've just found out that that might be on the table and they have all of this ahead of them. What do you say to them?
Yeah, uh, that too is a good question. Um, I have counseled a number of people on how to handle this. Um, Part of the problem, Spencer, is people who can't afford these things. It's a bigger challenge. And therefore, what you do is very important, is very important. Okay. I didn't need that, but I recognize that. And I try to help them and lead them that way. There are 3 offices with which I coordinate in the United States. We're trying to develop 2 more. One is Hart Brothers in Boston. Their head, who got a transplant about the time I did, just died about 3 months ago. He was 60, mid 60s. Patrick Sullivan, very good man. He started that and has done a lot of work in the community there. Tufts, Harvard, which do a lot of these transplants. Another is Ava's Heart, a woman out in California who's been able to raise a lot of money. She's well connected with the Hollywood set. Well connected, has an annual benefit that raises a lot of money. We refer each other to each other, people that come to our attention who they can handle better because their needs are in that area. We don't have somebody yet in New York or Chicago. We'd like to, or in Miami. We'd like to develop that. So we're working together to try to do that, over time. What was your question again? Help me.
Just ultimately what you would tell someone as about to end transplant journey.
Right. Yeah, it's either my meds or my age. Sometimes I forget. So, so at any rate, the other thing is to get with the right doctors.
Yeah.
Many see cardiologists. Cardiologists are not necessarily heart transplant or heart failure docs. There's a difference between those. And often they say, well, I'm dealing with cardiologists, this, that, and the other thing. I said, no, you have to get with a heart failure doc because what you've described is heart failure. And it's very, very serious. I counsel them on getting the right tests because sometimes cardiologists will do an EKG. No, you need an echocardiogram to determine the ejection fraction. Ejection fraction, or an EF, measures the efficiency of your heart. Mine at the time that I got my normal is 60. Yours is 60. Mine today is 60. Okay. By the time I was admitted to Emory University Hospital in end-stage heart failure, my ejection fraction was 15.
Wow.
I was barely able to do this. Wow. By the time I got a heart 2.5 months later, my ejection fraction was 8. What does that mean? Your heart is failing, all this other stuff. Don't go stupid. Yeah. And I mean by that, well, I'm going to go out and start eating all kinds of fast foods, or I'm going to go back to smoking or whatever. No, because if that happens, you're going to prove to be ineligible.
Yeah.
One of the advantages I had, I never took drugs, never smoked, and maybe I had a glass of wine. Now, the problem was, as I traveled around the world, there are bonsai trees who have done very well in Japan, because when I gave the traditional salute, I gave it and threw it over my shoulder. So there are bonsai trees which have done well. I couldn't drink, which was an important factor. So I encourage them, stay away from that, stay healthy, watch your diet, watch your weight, stay with your heart failure doctors, get some psychological help.
Mm-hmm.
And today, read my book.
Yeah.
Read my book and go online. Oh, the fourth thing is go online and read about what it is that you have. Yeah. I counsel them on this. You will get a heart. Same thing. Read a book, get help, talk to your doctors. But I also say, call me afterward.
Right.
Because you want to make sure, don't screw around with the medications, or you won't make it. And don't change your diet and go out and start eating all kinds of crazy things. You eat to live. you don't live to eat. I think your questions, by the way, were very smart, very insightful. And once again, I'm grateful for the time and for your reading Resolute. In due course, if I have time, I'm considering a second edition.
Wow.
Magnolia Pictures has approached me if I can get a screenwriter. I don't know how to do this about a Netflix movie.
Wow, for sure.
Um, I appreciate this very, very much, and I don't know what else to add. I think
I,
we've covered it.
I think we just about covered it, and I really appreciate you taking the time as well. This has been great.